Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Derek, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I seem to be spending starting most of my mornings this week in and around the River Clyde. Yesterday morning I started it across the River Clyde at the headquarters of BBC Scotland for one of these kind of cheerful encounters with Gary Robertson first thing in the morning. They are how I genuinely love to start my day. And as I was sitting outside the studio, Kay Adams was in to do the preamble for her programme yesterday morning, which is normally the sort of second round of cheerfulness on a daily basis. And she was saying that Rihanna was performing at the SECC. So I came over to here this morning with a real spring in my step, thinking, well, this will be a turn-up for the books if Derek Feely has organised this for the start of the day, but I'm afraid it's not been like that. But the spring in my step was appropriate this morning because as I came down the car this morning, I was looking at the diary entry for where I was coming to, and it wasn't sort of conservatively titled as the Public Service Improvement Conference. It was titled the Changing the World Conference. And I thought, well, there are definitely grounds for optimism if we're coming here today to talk about changing the world. And changing the world, in a sense, lies at the heart of public service improvement. And we as a government are intensely focused on ensuring that our public services meet that expectation, that they meet that test of how we can improve their performance to address the needs of a changing society, and a society that, by its very nature, is creating more demand and more requirement for our public services to perform in a very effective and a dynamic way. And I want to just share with you the thinking within the government about the whole issue of public service improvement and with it public service reform, and in a sense set out very directly why we are doing what we're doing and why we are not doing things that are being taken forward by some of the other administrations within the United Kingdom. One of the points that was of great value to the government in the Christie Commission report, which was produced in late June, which we'd commissioned to encourage debate about the future of our public services. It essentially produced three things for us in the Scottish Government. The first is that it endorsed the direction of travel that has been taken by the Scottish Government in terms of the approach that we're taking to the design and the delivery of public services within Scotland. Secondly, it did exactly what we wanted it to do, which was produce a proposition that had the capacity to build consensus and agreement about an agreed way forward within Scotland, rather than some proposition which sort of comes in from orbit and causes disruption and uncertainty and a lack of clarity about the direction of our public services. So the delivery of consent and some form of consensus approach was absolutely vital in our expectations around the Christie Commission report. But finally, although it gave us endorsement on direction of travel and it created the basis of consent, so we're all still together on all of this, it then did something very important. It gave us a very firm warning to get on with it and to move at a faster pace in terms of delivery of the reform agenda and the improvement agenda. And I think that those three factors are crucial to how the government has responded to the Christie Commission agenda, because it has given us the ability to develop a proposition and a set of proposals that were advanced in the spending review in September, which captures, I think, the body of thinking there is in Scotland about what are the agreed ways forward and why we should pursue those, but also a sense that we have got to deliver greater impetus to ensure that our public services are able, in a very difficult financial climate, to adapt and adjust to meet the challenges that lie ahead in the period of the spending review and the years that follow. And the reason why having an agreed proposition that is broadly endorsed across Scottish public life and Scottish civic life is that it gives us the opportunity to focus on how we deliver that improvement rather than debating what the contents of that improvement should actually be and some of the implications of that improvement. And if I look at the debate that's going on south of the border about particularly reform of the National Health Service, but also equally about the approach to economic and business development south of the border, I think there is, I think it's pretty obvious, there are real dangers and very damaging prospects for the delivery of public services south of the border, because the agenda isn't about the ways and the mechanisms and the approaches that can deliver improvement to meet public expectations. They are about pursuing an agenda of reform which is more about ideology and structure than it is about an agreed approach to public service improvement. So what we've decided to do in Scotland is to go with the grain of our society. The Christie Commission gave us that opportunity, but it also gave us a big challenge that we have to move at pace and deliver real impetus around the reform agenda that we take forward. In the government's response to the Christie Commission, we set out 4 principal pillars of our approach, and I just want to spend a moment talking about the importance of each one of those. The first pillar was about integration and collaboration, and the message of the government's reform agenda is that our opportunities to advance and progress will be if we deliver intense collaboration and cooperation where it matters in the delivery of public services in our localities. And you see this reflected in the approaches that have been taken on the way in which we're encouraging joint working through the change funds in adult social care, in the early years work, and in reducing reoffending, involving different elements of the public service, but giving them an impetus and an incentive to work intensively together to encourage collaboration and cooperation at local level. So that collaborative model is the key to how we draw together our public services, focusing intensely on the improvement in outcomes for members of the public within Scotland. The second major theme of the public service reform agenda is the question of preventative spending, whereby we focus our efforts on intervening early in addressing the challenging circumstances that we face in many aspects of our society to deliver better outcomes for our citizens. And that again is reflected by not just the change funds, but some of the wider policy agenda of the government, where the sustained efforts we're taking to reduce the impact of alcohol consumption in Scotland through minimum pricing legislation and other interventions are designed to tackle some of the endemic and challenging issues that we face as a society. So the focus on prevention is about a very wide agenda about ensuring that as public servants we act swiftly and promptly to change the pattern of development and to improve outcomes. The third the third pillar of the reform agenda is on the whole question of performance culture, and that will be implicit in what you talk about today, as will all of this agenda. But the purpose of the performance culture has to be not some pointless exercise that encourages and motivates my friends in the Daily Mail to produce league tables of who's good and who's rubbish, and not surprisingly to focus on who's rubbish rather than who's good. But our focus on our performance culture must be about using comparative experience from one part of the country, one public service, one element of what we support, to drive a process of improvement right across our public services in Scotland. So the government's interest in having a greater focus on the performance culture isn't to have some crude league table exercise that allows us to beat up selected public servants every so often on aspects of performance. It is about giving us the tools and the mechanisms to drive, and the data, crucially, to drive improvement in the way in which our public services are delivered. And we all need to embrace that culture to make sure that we have an open discussion about how we can do things better. Because that brings me on to my final element of the reform programme, which is about our workforce development. And this is a crucial factor, particularly given the circumstances that we now face in relation to the development of our workforce and the challenging circumstances we will all face due to the industrial action next week and the wider issues surrounding the concerns of the public sector workforce. I do not accept that any public servant came into their work in the public sector to make things worse for the people they serve. I think every public servant comes into public service to make things better for the people that we all serve. And the challenge for all of us at this difficult time is to continue to motivate and to encourage our staff and those who participate in the public services to excel in the development of public services and the application of those public services and the outcomes that are achieved as a consequence of those public services. And although we have a very challenging environment just now with the implications of the freezes in public sector pay, the very direct implications of the increase in pension contributions leading to the industrial disruption that we will face next Wednesday. At the same time as all of that is going on, I'm still also seeing a highly motivated environment within the public service wishing to deliver the improvement that this conference is focused upon. So ensuring that at the heart of our reform agenda, we nurture and motivate our workforce, recognising that that is the greatest tool we have to deliver the improvements in our public service environment, will be one of the strongest weapons that we can deploy in that improvement journey. So what we have in the public service reform agenda is a set of interventions which the government believes go with the grain of Scottish society, that build on the focus on outcomes that have been a characteristic of this administration since it was elected in 2007, and reinforces the motivation around and the requirement for greater collaboration at local level, which was an implicit part of the move from a much more directive culture that predated our administration in 2007 into a more collaborative approach, which has been the characteristic of our administration since 2007 and will remain a characteristic of our administration for the duration of its term in office. Now, one final element is important that we focus upon, and that is on the whole question of how we consider and debate the agenda of performance improvement within Scotland. I touched on this in relation to the performance culture, but one of the elements of our approach on performance has been not to focus on endless points of data about the individual performance of public services, but to put in place a framework that allows us to judge whether as a country we are moving forward or whether we are not achieving that objective through the National Performance Framework. And if you look at the National Performance Framework today, the balance of the indicators demonstrate that over the last 4 years, our country, despite all the difficulties, all the financial pressures, despite all of that, our country, on the National Performance Framework measure, has improved quite significantly in those 4 years. And again, you would never know that if you listened to Good Morning Scotland or read the Daily Mail or the Scotsman or whatever it happens to be. But that is a measure of the fact that we have successfully engaged public servants right across the country, sector by sector, area by area, discipline by discipline, in a very focused way of making sure that what we do in the health service or our local authorities or our enterprise companies or wherever it happens to be is focused on improving Scotland, enabling us to be a more successful country, enabling us to achieve the purpose of the government. And that's a tribute in difficult circumstances to the leadership of different organisations and the contribution of our employees to that process. And what I hope comes out of today is an understanding and an ownership of that agenda in the years to come, because we will only continue that decisive shift in performance in our country that we've delivered through, and evidence through the National Performance Framework from 2007 to 2011. If we are all pointing in the same direction, if we are all collaborating and cooperating at local and at national level, and if we are focused on constantly improving, continuously improving the quality of our public services in Scotland, I'm absolutely confident that we have the leadership and the people to deliver that right across Scotland. I can assure you of the firmest and the most consistent ministerial support to that objective. And I look forward to hearing the proceeds of today's discussions in driving that culture of continuous improvement throughout our public services, because what it will deliver is the benefits for our people in this country, and that's what brought all of us into public service in Scotland today. Thank you very much.